In this review session, we're going to take a look at how do you combine signed numbers. And when we talk about signed numbers, what we mean is that the number comes with either a positive sign or a negative sign. Okay, so take for example, let's say I have negative 10 minus 4 minus of minus 2. Okay, so before we explain this, let me kind of outline some rules out here when you're dealing with signed numbers. So let's say, for example, you have a negative outside a parentheses, and then inside the parentheses, you have a number with a negative sign. Okay, well, it turns out in this case, the negative cancels out the other negative, so that makes the entire thing positive. Okay, now let's say you have a negative outside and a positive inside, or you could have like no sign inside, which means it's a positive. Well, that would make it negative. What if you had a positive outside and a negative inside? Well, that would still make it negative. And then if you had a positive outside and a positive inside, then that would make it positive. Okay? So the rule out here is when the signs don't match, see, when the signs don't match, then the negative wins. Okay? But when the signs match, then they become positive. Okay? So we're going to apply that logic out here. So as you can see, there's a negative outside and then there's a negative inside, the two out there. So that's going to make that a positive. Okay? And so we can just go ahead and write that as a positive 2. And then inside out here, inside the first parentheses, you have two numbers and they have the same signs. So whenever you have two numbers and the signs are the same, that means you add them and you keep the sign, the same sign. So we add the 10 and the 4, which gives me a 14, and the sign I'm going to keep is the negative sign, okay? And now it becomes a negative 14 plus 2, a negative 14 plus 2, and now you have the case of two numbers, excuse me, opposite signs. Okay, so what you do is you take the larger number, subtract the smaller number from it, and retain the sign of the larger number. Okay, so we're going to take the 14, subtract the 2 from 14, that gives me 12, and I'm going to retain the sign of the 14. So that's a negative 12. And there you have it. That's the first answer. Let's take a look at the next. And another problem. Let's say I have negative 12 in parentheses and negative 3. Now here's the thing about parentheses. When you have a parentheses and then immediately followed by another parentheses, that means these two numbers are multiplied. Okay, so when they're multiplied, then the signs get multiplied too. So that negative and negative, that is going to follow the rule that we laid out here, negative times negative. Okay, so therefore that negative and negative makes that a positive. Okay, so we're going to write positive, and then we're going to multiply the 12 with the 3, which is going to give me a 36. Okay, and you don't have to keep the positive. You can just drop the positive and just write 36. All right, so feel free to pause the video, try to work the problems yourself if you already understand how to do this. If you do not, feel free to walk through the steps and then try to work the problem yourself. Okay, take a look at the next one. So let's say we have negative 4 over 3, and this whole thing is times negative 3 over 8. Okay, as you can see, excuse me, we're dealing with a fraction, okay, and another fraction. The logic is still the same, okay, which means a negative and negative is going to make that a positive, and then the fractions are going to get multiplied, just like we multiplied the numbers in the previous example. So that's 4 over 3 times 3 over 8. And now what we can do is we can go ahead and reduce and then multiply. So we can reduce the 3 and the 3, leaving behind 1 and 1. We can reduce the 4 and the 8. 4 times 4 is 1, and 4 times 2 is 8. That gives me positive 1 times 1 over 1 times 2. I can drop the positive sign, so that makes it 1 over 2, and we're done. All right, let's try another one. So let's say I have negative 36 over negative 9. Okay, so here's the thing about now I have these two numbers and they're both negatives divided by each other. So the logic of what I showed you out here with these signs, the same logic applies when you divide them. Okay, which means that if I take a negative and I divide it by another negative term, that makes it a positive. If I take a positive divided by another positive term, that's still positive. If I take a positive, I divide it by a negative term, it becomes negative. If I take a negative and divide it by a positive term, that makes it negative. So it doesn't really matter whether you're multiplying or dividing. The outcome is still the same. So the key thing to remember is if you have the same sign, then it becomes a positive. If you have opposite signs, it becomes a negative. Okay, I might want to write this down out here. So same signs leads to a positive answer. Opposite signs leads to a negative answer. Okay, so out here we have the same sign, so that's going to be positive. You don't have to write the positive like we mentioned before. If you take 36 and divide it by 19 and by 9, you get 4. I'm sorry, that just got erased by mistake. So that's 4 over 1, which is equal to 4. Okay, now let's take a look at one that is a little more complicated than the previous one. So I have negative 5 times 3 minus 1, and the whole thing is over 8 minus 4 times negative 2. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to simplify the numerator first, this whole thing, and then I'm going to simplify the denominator next. And then I'm going to take a look at what the if the fraction can be reduced further. Okay, so negative 5 times 3 is going to give me negative 15. And then that's a minus 1. And then let's do the denominator as well. So what do I have out here? I have negative times negative, that's a positive, and 4 times 2 is 8. So that's positive 8, right? So 8 plus 8. Okay, so that's going to give me negative 16 on top. Okay, and at the bottom is going to be positive 16, right? Okay, which is going to give me, well, 16 times 1 is 16, and 16 times 1 is 16. So that's negative 1 over 1, which is equal to negative 1. And there you have it. That's the answer to that question. Okay, let's do another one. Now this one is going to look a little crazy. So 4 square times 8 minus 8 times 2, and the whole thing is divided by negative 1.2 square minus of minus 0.556. Okay, now here's the interesting thing about this kind of a problem. Don't get too excited about doing all this math. Obviously the denominator looks more complicated than the numerator, so don't be too hasty to simplify the denominator yet. Okay, so let's go ahead and simplify the numerator first. Okay, so try to do the simpler part first and see what you get. Okay, so if I simplify the numerator, I get, well, 4 square is going to give me 16, and then 8 times 2 is going to give me another 16. So that's 16 minus 16. And then I have this whole thing sitting down here, and I'm not even going to try to simplify that. And the reason for that is because I can see if I take the 16 and subtract the 16, I actually get a 0. The 0 over what? The 0 over this term. Now here's the interesting thing. Whenever you have a 0 sitting on top of anything, it actually makes the whole thing 0. So that entire thing equals 0, and we're done. So that's kind of, working, we're trying to work smart out here. It doesn't really matter what the denominator is. If the numerator is 0, then the whole thing simplifies to 0. Okay, let's do another one. This one is going to be 3 square minus 16 divided by 3 square minus 9. Okay, so the top becomes 3 squares 9 minus 16, and the bottom is 9 minus 9. Now the second I see that, look at that, 9 minus 9 is going to be 0, right? So I could simplify the 9 minus 16. Let's just go ahead and do it. 9 minus 16 is going to be what? 16 minus 9 gives you 7. And since the larger number has the negative sign, that makes it a negative 7. But 9 minus 9 at the bottom is actually 0. And here's the interesting thing. Whenever you have anything, it doesn't matter what, anything divided by 0. So when 0 is sitting in the denominator only by itself, then this entire thing is undefined. Okay, so that's the thing. So whenever you have 0 sitting at the bottom of any fraction, okay, it's going to be undefined. It doesn't matter what's on top. Okay, so don't let the negative 7 confuse you. And that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you for watching.